The Ministry of Earth Sciences and National Center for Coastal Research are supporting the TERI to lead the track on cleaner oceans. In this track, the sources of and current status of marine pollution, key challenges faced and likely solutions, including policy recommendations, technological interventions, and development of comprehensive institutional regimes will be discussed as we aim to move towards cleaner oceans. We look forward to hearing multiple viewpoints of stakeholders representing both developed and developing country perspectives. I now request Ms. Kaya Bilton, Minister Counselor, Royal Norwegian Embassy, to give the opening remarks for this session.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends of the oceans, on behalf of the Ambassador of Norway and in his place, I would like to start by saying how very pleased we are from the side of the Norwegian government to be here and to discuss with you what we believe to be one of the most important challenges of the environment of today. Indian government, industry representatives and experts, students, NGOs, welcome. I am replacing the ambassador today because we have a minister in Delhi who is going to sign with the government of India an agreement on marine pollution as we speak. This is one of the fastest growing environmental concerns the globe has faced. Every minute, an estimated 15 tons of litter will enter the oceans, harming marine ecosystems. Marine pollution and microplastic is spreading across the planet and will not respect borders. This is a global issue which requires global action. I believe we share the common vision that stronger effort is needed to combat this, and it needs to be collective. While the knowledge is incomplete as to sources and pathways of marine pollution, also on the social and economic effects of it, we do know more than enough today to take action already. Together with other states, Norway has, since 2014, been a strong driver on this issue in the United Nations Environment Assembly. And in December 2017, we were very pleased to see that the Assembly took a bold step and agreed to a long-term elimination of all discharge of plastic pollution into the oceans. But this vision will not fulfill itself. The issue is simple and complex at the same time. Estimates tell us that approximately 80% of the pollution that ends up in the ocean comes from land-based sources. So while the problem is in the oceans, many important solutions are on land. It seems logical then to deduce that improvement in waste management on land will be a key priority. But we will not be focusing on a global ban on plastics. There are many good reasons to use plastic. Try to imagine a hospital without it. But the real problem is, what do we do with it when we no longer need it for its primary use? There are many initiatives underway to tackle marine pollution, but we lack a coordinating structure that can help us direct our resources to where they are needed the most. We need a framework for action which support governments in their policy making and in the implementation of waste management and waste prevention. A global framework can facilitate technology transfer, the sharing of best practices, and capacity building. Norway would like to strengthen such an international cooperation to prevent marine pollution through the auspices of the Environment Assembly. In March this year, the world will gather in Nairobi for the 4th Assembly, and we hope that this gathering will take the marine pollution issue a great step forwards towards the zero discharge vision. But then, a strong intergovernmental framework will also need to be accompanied by effective tools and strong action. The Indian and Norwegian governments have only last January agreed to working more closely on this. During the Norwegian Prime Minister's visit to Delhi only a few weeks ago, the most important deliverable was an MOU establishing the Norway-India Ocean Dialogue. Through this, we will share experiences and competence and try to contribute to cleaner, healthier oceans, sustainable use of ocean resources, and sustainable growth of the blue economy. The first joint initiative under this agreement will be signed, hopefully today. This marine pollution initiative will, over several years, have 4 pillars. One will be to support local governments in implementing sustainable waste management. A second will be on collecting and analyzing information about source and scope of marine pollution in India. A third will be to support cleanup efforts and awareness campaigns that are already going on in several places. And not least, a very exciting pilot project where we will try to use plastic waste as a fuel substitute for coal in cement production and in developing deposit schemes for plastic. Finally, I would like to highlight the role of business and private sector industry. Marine pollution is not only a problem of waste handling, it is also a problem of wasting resources. An effective circular economy can move from contributing to waste and pollution to reuse of waste and a reduction in pollution. A circular economy requires products that are better suited for reuse and for recycling, as well as an increase in the use of secondary materials. Private sector and industry has a key part to play, and the business cases for these is very strong. A government's role is to make wise decisions that provide direction for research and development, as well as a predictable context for the private sector to come up with solutions that are knowledge-based and sustainable. The third sector, the NGOs and the initiatives that come from the activists and the political movements and the beach cleaners and the students, is the important reminder for these knowledge-based solutions to be put into practice and for us to keep the politicians to their words. Close collaboration between all the parties to this is crucial. The global issue of marine pollution needs global effort, but all action starts at home. It is by working together that we can make sure that we all pull in the same direction, whether it is local, national, international, or on a global level. We would like us to wish each other luck in our endeavors, and good luck with the debate today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kaya Bilton, for your opening remarks. Now we will start with our discussions, but first, could I please invite Dr. K. Somasundar, Scientist and Director, Ministry of Earth Sciences, to join us on the dais, please. I also request Dr. Ramna Murthy to join us on the dais. He is the Scientist and Director for National Center for Coastal Research. I request Dr. Sunil Pandey, Director of Environment and Waste Management Division, TERI, to join us. Thank you. I now request Kaushik Chandrasekhar, Associate Fellow at Center of Waste Management, TERI, to set the context for our panel discussion. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, speakers, and my dear colleagues from TERI. Today we have gathered here to discuss on a topic that is having a profound impact on environment. To put into perspective, 8 million tons of plastic get deposited in the ocean floors every year. About 150 million tons have already been established according to reports. And we're expecting this to double by 2025. Now, we are here to discuss about our course towards moving towards cleaner oceans. And I'm here to brief you about a concept called marine litter, which is a global challenge. Very quickly, I would be running through what marine pollution is and some introduction to marine litter. Some marine litter studies in India, a case study on a hotspot analysis which was performed. Understanding the link between municipal solid waste management and marine litter, some important points that were raised during the Chennai Regional Dialogue, which was held on 7th of December as a precursor to this meeting, and a few key points for discussion in both the panels today. Some effects of the human activity on marine environment. We look at ocean acidification, where the pH levels of the ocean are actually decreasing because of increasing levels of carbon dioxide. Largely, we look at the ocean being a little more basic, which having a pH level of more than 7. Slowly, you could see that this value is decreasing over time. Although in smaller values, but you could see that by 2050 we're looking at about 70%, and 2100 we're looking about 125% of change. Now, what happens because of this is an adverse effect towards aquatic life. We're talking about commercial fisheries. The output of commercial fisheries coming down. The reproductive and immune system of aquatic life, which is being hindered because of the increased acidification which is happening. Then we come on to the trash in the ocean or marine litter, which includes industrial effluents, looking at solid waste, agricultural runoffs. As I mentioned, there's about 8 million tons of plastics entering the oceans every year, which is almost equivalent to a garbage truck every minute. So we are aware of reports which claim that plastic waste killing aquatic birds and seabirds and mammals which are found dead, having impregnated plastic bags in them. Of course, the oil drilling is another aspect. We have oil spills happening from vessels. We have offshore drilling that happens, which is creating an impact on the aquatic life. Quickly about marine litter, it refers to any anthropogenic manufactured or processed material that gets discarded into the waterways, river streams, storm drains. Plastic accounts to about almost 100% in some cases of floating litter which is found. Some types of marine litter include metals, glass, rubber, clothing, textile, tar balls, paper and cardboard. One of the UNEP studies also quote that if the marine debris is unchecked and goes at the same rate, we would almost end up getting a kg of plastic for every 3 kg of fish by 2025. And probably by 2050, we're looking at more plastic than fish. So the rates at which studies are quoting these numbers seem to be alarming. And we do have, I wouldn't say data to substantiate it, but I would say visual evidence which goes by, I was having this conversation with Professor Lampert as well, on data which is necessary to substantiate our claims. And of course, we would be looking at one of those aspects as we go ahead. Where does these originate from? We're looking at land-based sources, ocean-based sources. Land-based, largely, we're looking at beach litter, poorly managed urban waste, which leaks into water bodies. Microbeads from personal care products. I think this is an important aspect which is getting addressed in countries like the United States, where products containing microbeads, like beauty products, are not allowed to be shelved in markets. So other than that, we're looking at sewage-related litter, ocean, and then fishery nets, a very, very important aspect that are just abandoned on the ocean. One aspect that we've discussed even during the regional dialogue was the froth that comes out in Bangalore in the Vartur Lake. So the various studies have been held on to figure out the reason behind the froth that comes out. Many of them actually claim that it's because of the high content of phosphates and sulfates which detergent companies have effluents into flowing into that lake. So 80% studies, of course, show that 80% of marine litter originates from land-based sources. Why is this a global issue, a transboundary issue? Well, we had an ocean liner, just to an example to show you that it's more of a global issue. We had an ocean liner which toppled into the ocean with about 12 containers which contained these plastic ducks. And these plastic ducks were offloaded next to the coast of Russia. And over a period of time, you could actually see the route it has taken. And within 8 months, these plastic ducks were found on the coast of Alaska. Over here, this is where it got toppled, and over 6 months you could find it here. Beyond which, I think over a period of 10 years, they've taken a route, and you could find them over here. The ducks were actually figured on the coast over here on the North Atlantic Sea. So to go on to say it's more than a single nation taking action. It has to be a concerted effort on tackling this global issue. Of course, we're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, which would be addressed by doing so. We have the SDG 14, which talks about life below water. We have the targets set very clear. By 2025. We would significantly reduce marine pollution of all kinds, especially the land-based activities. Again, coming back to the data, some studies that have been taken up in India on basis of marine plastics, many of them have been on individual capacity. It's been few in number too. For instance, we have the Alangsoya shipbreaking yard in Gujarat, where Reddy et al. Documents ingestion of 4 thick plastic bags into a whale which ended up there at the coast. We also had Ganesh Pandian who documented that 2 major marine litter items found on Gulf of Mannar included plastic as well as cloth. So, so on to say, the studies have been more of an individualistic nature, and there needs to be a more intense documentation of findings to back it up. Another one was Kaladaran et al., who's actually performed this study on the marine litter status of Indian beaches. It was also established here that the beaches of Karnataka and Goa are the worst polluted with litter, and Goa being per capita of generation of marine litter being the highest among all other beaches. Beach litter analysis was done for Marina Beach as well, where we found that the plastic was the maximum over here, along with cornstalk apparently seems to be more of an ingredient there. We have paper and plastic bags also occupying top slots, along with food wrappers and plastic cups. One of the hotspot analysis that was performed by Indonesia, the government of Indonesia, was done by World Bank. And this is one of the ideal case studies I would like to talk about, because the assessment was taken place alongside 15 coastal cities in western and central Indonesia. So the study, talked about, the efficacy of legislations in the country to address marine litter. It reviewed all these legislations. It analyzed the data which is required to come at a conclusion. It also involved some field sampling, some mapping of leakage, hotspots. The map is not very clear here. All these spots talk about potential leakage points into the water bodies. So, of course, it also included social behavioral findings as well. But this kind of a study throws in a lot of idea for policymakers to show what are the potential sources of pollution as far as a city or a coastal city is concerned. Considering that 40% of the world's population is there in the coastal cities, I think such a study throws up a lot of interesting facts. the link between solid waste management and marine debris is another point which I wanted to make here. The link is obvious here with India occupying the 12th spot in 2010 among the among countries of mismanaged waste, and it is touted that by 2025 India would occupy the 4th slot. The map here shows the plastic inputs from rivers onto the oceans. So the larger the zeros you find over here, the larger are the plastic inputs that go into the ocean. Majority of the waste that is getting generated in cities, especially the coastal cities, find their endpoint at nalas or the drainage or the local drains. These wastes which end up in these nala end up at the riverfront and the larger oceans, which is its final endpoint. The Ganges has been recorded as the second top polluting river among the top 20 rivers in the world. Global plastic trade is another aspect which I wanted to cover, considering that many of the EU countries and the countries from the West are exporting waste, and the fact that China has banned imports of incoming waste. Many of this consignments actually end up in countries with weaker environmental controls, so which is of course leading to a lot of plastic dumping. So this is another aspect we would like to discuss today during our deliberations. A similar dialogue which was held, it was the Chennai Regional Dialogue, which was held in December. Some important points which were flagged off by experts in the regional dialogue include the need for standardizing monitoring protocols and harmonizing of data across studies, the need for an action plan for for systematic collection and disposal of solid and liquid waste, developing an industrial action plan, including zonal action plan for location of new industries and adoption of environmental criteria, while providing economic incentives for industries for adoption of each of these environmental plans. Of course, they also spoke about the need for capacity building, which is extremely important at all levels, including the government, and the introduction of marine spatial planning, which is currently missing, would actually lead to a lot of data collection as well as data streamlining. Some key points that we would address during today's sessions would include the status assessment for data measures to be taken to improve data mapping. How does solid waste management in the coastal cities impact marine litter? And some steps to be taken to improve research on microplastics, nanoplastics, and chemicals leached out of plastic materials. In the session 2, we are looking at solutions, potential way forward on achieving cleaner oceans. We're looking at what are the local, regional, and national, international level policy recommendations and technological interventions that could be implemented to make a change. What is the role of the extended producer's responsibility, or the EPR, and how tax rebates and other market-based instruments be like a change maker in achieving what is required. And finally, we are also looking at how effective voluntary declarations for large users for single-use packaging be to achieve the targets by, say, 2022. With this, I close my presentation. I'm positive that deliberations today would throw light on these topics, and thank you.
Thank you, Kaushik, for setting the context. We now move towards panel discussion 1, titled Evaluating the Current Status of Marine Pollution and Key Challenges of Oceans. I request Dr. Somasundar to chair the panel discussion 1.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, distinguished delegates from India and abroad, to the important thematic technical session on moving to cleaner oceans, particularly the marine pollution in terms of the plastic. Why do you worry about plastic? You know, these are major 3 things which we need to look at it we all know that the water is the main source and sustenance for the life on the planet. You know, its clean ocean is important for sustainable development. What kind of measures being taken by the India and abroad, various countries to clean the oceans? And how do we promote the involvement of stakeholders in addressing this problem? What are the challenges and opportunities exist in this area? These are the key areas. We know the planet Earth is covered by oceans about 70%, and which has a volume of 1.3 billion cubic kilometers. And our population is about 7 billion. If you divide by area by person, each person gets an area of 1/5 of a cubic kilometer area, which gives 50% of oxygen we breathe. It absorbs 30% of carbon dioxide we release into the ocean. It absorbs great amount of heat that we're generating into the atmosphere. It also gives the 30% of protein requirement for the population. And if you see the marine space, which 90% of the trade in terms of volume is done using by the oceans, 90% of the communication, internet communication, is done through the cabling that is done on the oceans. So these are the things in a global perspective. If you look at the national perspective, India has a coastline of 7,500 kilometers with an exclusive economic zone of 2.2 million square kilometers. And this exclusive economic zone embedded with 1,300 islands rich in the marine biodiversity. So, and 70% of the oil from world over is being transported across the Indian Ocean. Indian Ocean is a very unique compared to Atlantic and Pacific, because the Indian Ocean is bound by the land in the northern part, whereas in the Pacific Atlantic Ocean is open for both poles. So there is an amount of exchange of dilution that can take place both in terms of oxygen, carbon dioxide and all. Whereas the Indian Ocean is bound by the land in the north, any amount of excess pollution may cause severe damage to the marine environment. So that we need to keep in mind when you are going for. Why the plastic we are talking today? Ocean has been experiencing the pollution of various kinds: metals, nutrients, fertilizers, carbon dioxide. It's for over centuries. Maybe in the last two centuries because of after the Industrial Revolution. But plastic pollution started only few decades ago, 3-4 decades ago. Unlike other pollutants, where the ocean has some capacity to assimilate the chemicals, like 90% of the nutrients released through the through waste and then through agriculture practices, it gets absorbed within 30-40 kilometers close to the coast, and it gets absorbed. But whereas plastic is a synthetic material, and it stays for decades together in the ocean, and it has got enormous impact on the marine life. And that's what a detailed presentation has been made by just now, which sets a tone for today's discussion. There are enormous challenges. Particularly, we don't have enough data. We talk about 8 million tons per year, and by next 2025 we will be 250 billion, and all the plastic getting accumulated in the subtropical gyres, in 5 gyres located in different parts of the ocean. Now there is no limit. Plastic is reached all the way up to Mariana Trench, 11 kilometers deep into the ocean. It is also reached Antarctic and Arctic. Discharge from various countries. It's not just from one country. So unlike other pollution, and these processes have no political boundaries. Ocean processes have no political boundaries. So they go from one place to other place. So we need to work in a collective way, not at a national level, international level, regional level. These are very important. When we are talking about Indian Ocean, we must work in regional level. Something happened in Bangladesh may affect India, something happened in India may affect India. Like tsunami that occurred in Indonesia may affect India. So this kind of plastic getting distributed to the various coastal regions, not generated by any particular country, but it can go to any So there are enormous challenges. First of all, the data gap is so high. Unless we measure the data, we cannot manage. And what my intention is, we should minimize going into the sea, because once it gets into the sea, it's very difficult to retrieve. Ocean space is such a vast. There are now developed by some countries to retrieve plastic, but the ocean space is so fast, we cannot retrieve anything once it goes into the ocean. So we must minimize the plastic going into the sea from the coast. That is our main objective. It could be using some innovations and some kind of a technological innovations to increase the solid waste management, bring some new practices, best practices available in other countries to minimize the plastic pollution. Because as I said in the presentation, if now every 3 kg of fish, 1 kg plastic, because plastic is going to, I think this problem of, there are say 17 sustainable goals, but the most important goal is goal number 14, life below the water. This gives the sustenance to the planet Earth. I give more importance to this goal than any other goal, because if you leave it open, it is like a climate change. It's an irreversible change. I'm not trying to scare people, but this is because of the nature of the substance. Other things can be absorbed by the ocean. If you release some chemical or some metal, some nutrient, it can absorb. Ocean has the capacity, but plastic, ocean has no capacity to absorb. So even a big, I read it somewhere in the science magazine, in the cleanest water, huge number of mortality of whales took place. What is the reason? It's a very clean water. Sometimes this microplastic, even small plastic, is good enough to kill a big whale of tons of big whale, because of it gets into the neck of the whale and then whales can get killed. So once a plastic gets into the ocean, it can generate into microplastic, and which is causing environmental damage, irreversible environmental damage. That presentation made just now as a set stone for today's discussion. I think I will request our panel. I am joined by K.A. Bilton, Mr. Ravanamurthy, and Sunil Pandey, and Dr. Chandrasekhar and Richard Rampart. I would request Dr. Ravanamurthy to initiate some discussion on this matter.
So, good evening to all. I think well was said by Norwegian ambassador. She has given a complete picture of right from marine pollution. Finally, she ended up with marine plastic, which is true that I think we have some kind of information on the ocean pollution, but on the plastic, which was already told by Mr. Kaushik, there is no data available anywhere in the world. In fact, few data is available, but these numbers are all quite alarming, and then we need to have a good quality data on the marine litter or marine plastic. Coming to that international collaboration by the Ministry of Earth Sciences, we have committed to United Nations Clean Seas Program. Ministry has committed for that, and then after that we started the action on quantifying the marine litter along the Indian coast. That was the first meeting which was done with the support of THERI. Thanks to THERI, we had a Chennai Regional Dialogue on December 7th, where many stakeholders were invited. This has given an insight into what need to be done really to quantify the marine plastic. Also at the regional level, Ministry of Earth Science and Ministry of Environment is a part of South Asian Cooperation for Environment program. We have developed a concept paper on the marine litter. Status paper has been made. This is based on the preliminary results from the regional seas for that. Coming to the within the intergovernmental cooperation, MOS and MOF, Dr. Arvind Nautiyal is here. We work together on many of the areas, because MOS deals mostly on the ocean in terms of dynamics, but whereas they deal from the regulation point of view, it is one-to collaboration on that. Coming to the marine pollution data, Ministry of Earth Sciences got a long database of 25 years, right from 1995, a data called the Coastal Ocean Monitoring and Prediction System. We compiled this 25 years data, which clearly indicates that the majority of the pollution is from the sewage and then which is quite common in many of the rivers, either it is Mumbai or Chennai or Vizag or Goa. Immediately after the onset of monsoon, all the pollutant directly comes into the sea, and then you see havoc first 1 or 2 months. After that, like Dr. Samtandar was mentioning about that ocean gas assimilation capacity to assimilate some of these pollutants into that. But most interesting part compared to the land, to the aquatic environment, to the sea, even though we see the dispersion characteristics are very high in the ocean, but always this local circulation can have its own impact on many of the pollutants which accumulate even other parts of the season also. In fact, the classic case in one of the study what we have done for Chennai, we are normally supposed to get high concentrations during October, November with onset of monsoon, but during December, January also, a lot of foam has been formed along the beaches of the coastal waters, which is quite alarming, and then people are really don't know where from it comes for that. Some of the concentration from the phosphate and sewage is very high into the ocean waters. This pollution need to be accounted carefully for that. Coming to we are talking about only land-based pollution, which was already talked enough on. 80% will come from the ocean, from the land-based activities. Almost 30% will come from the ocean side, ports and harbors, or some of the outfalls which was going into the directly into the sea, which also adds to the some kind of contribution. But majority comes from the rivers. Almost all the rivers of the major areas have become a cesspools, and then sewage, then directly it comes to the ocean. In addition to this marine land-based pollution, we also need to account a recent study by Ministry of Earth Sciences on the entire west coast of India, marine ecosystem dynamics for Arabian Sea. Without influence of the land-based impact itself, the oxygen levels in the west coast varies depending upon the season. This gives a lot of fish mortality in the many places. In fact, some of the fish pools which were there are fish accumulation and all those things in one place have shifted their own domain to the change in the climate. Still we are investigating that further. We had data of almost 80 months right from the coast up to 200 meters water depth. Data has been collected, which has given a very good significant influence on how naturally the systems will respond to the climatic changes or the seasonal changes. That need to be accounted very much once we want to discriminate between the land-based pollution and then what natural things which can happen there. As said by Dr. Somsundar, MOS has committed to quantify the entire coast, what is the quantity of marine litter which is entering into the sea, and how it impacts the food chain, how it is being transported into the coastal waters. In fact, some of the initial studies, which I think Kaushik has not quoted, 2 publications on the marine sea. We got even a marine plastic micropellets at 40-meter water depth in the bivalves of some of the organisms which was experienced there, and then these results have been published on that, which shows a clear indication that lot more to be done. Rightly talked by Norwegian ambassador. We need to have a good framework internationally. How do we collect the data, and what kind of analysis we do for that, and how do we quantify the sources of marine plastic or pollution. Then only we can formulate a policy or a strategy. Otherwise, we'll be missing some of the points, and then we're getting into the lot of other implications. These are all some of the directions points, or which points from my side. Then I leave it to the next panel.
Thank you, Dr. Onmurthy, for perspective from the MOI side. Now, may I request Sunil Pandey to provide views from their side.
Thank you, sir. I'll go a little back to 2005-06, when, as a part of Global Program of Action, we did a report for MOEFCC looking at land-based coastal pollution. And those days, plastics was not issue, and biggest source of pollution, again, as Dr. Murthy said, was untreated sewage from cities, which still is, and at the best guess, around 70% of untreated sewage still finds its way in river. And it's believed that rivers finally, most of the rivers, they drain into coastal waters, and thus contributing to coastal pollution. And we also, at that point of time, took a lot of data from Ministry of Earth Sciences and Department of Earth Sciences and various research institutes working for them. And what we didn't realize that point of time was that the same streams also carry plastics, other than solid waste being directly dumped into these streams. They also carry plastics, and which finally lead to coastal waters and then go to seas and then to oceans. So now we have better understanding on what has been source of, if you call land-based activities leading to coastal pollution or marine pollution. How, I mean, what is the linkage between the land-based pollution, and finally it's getting translated to marine waters, starting from coastal waters. Then subsequently, we also looked at the literature regarding, we were worried by, I mean, how solid waste management is, I mean, improper solid waste management is leading to marine litter. And the literature suggested that what we, I mean, especially in the case of plastics, what has been cached, what has been trapped is good news. Around 60–70% is collected and recycled. But the concern was what has been leaking from the collection systems. And though some countries, the figure quoted are lesser, I mean, they say that only 30–40% leaks from collection systems. But globally, if you see, the figure is very abysmal, and it says around only 9% globally is recycled for the plastics which are coming out as a waste. And majority of it is reaching dump sites, disposal sites, and from there, finally, it contributing to marine litter. So that's a cause of concern, and so that is why we need, I mean, better understanding of waste management systems in the cities, and how we can improve them, how we can look at addressing the leakages which are currently recorded, and also establishing what kind of leakages are happening, because there's a lot of uncertainty if you look at city to city level, especially to start with. I think it will be a good idea to start from coastal cities. We in India have a large coastline, around 7,500 kilometers of coastline, and looking at coastal cities to begin with, and looking at solid waste management services and also wastewater management services, which are seeming to be two major sources for pollution of coastal waters, and also looking at how we can address the present leakage in collection, and how we can basically improve our collection itself. Forget about recycling, that's the second step, but collection itself, so that, I mean, less and less gets leaked. So at present I'll stop here, and then maybe I'll come back to it again.
Thank you, Dr. Panil Pandey. Now may I call upon Richard to share some views about this topic.
Thank you very much, and many thanks to the organisers for inviting me here. The first thing to say is, I guess, that usually on a panel such as this, I find myself disagreeing with most of the other panel members. But in this instance, I actually agree with most of them. Some of most of what they're saying. So perhaps I just stand back just a little bit, and just to frame it in the sense of what we actually care about in the ocean. And it seems to me that one has to be asked very hard questions about the nature of this particular contaminant. Now, what we're interested in, I guess everybody in this room, are ecosystem services. So that can be food, or recreation, or carbon sequestration from the atmosphere. So this is what we term as the ecosystem services. What does it do for human beings? I mean, let's leave aside ethics for the time being, which is another important area. So these ecosystems are under a variety of pressures from the human beings, and including overfishing and liquid pollutants and the sewage, which has just been referred to, persistent organic pollutants, all the nasty things that come in with that. But in addition to that, the other threats to it are increased temperature, increased acidity, increased sea level, and then lastly, increased solid contamination, particularly from plastics. And I think what we have to think very carefully about is what are the risks from each of those, and they all pose risks. And in order to understand these risks, we have to spend some effort understanding them, and then we have to spend a lot more effort if we're going to try and reduce those risks. So I like to think of risk in terms of two bits to risk. One is exposure, and the other is the harm done at the levels of exposure that we experience. And so, as has been said by several of the other panelists, our lack of understanding of this really, really simple business of how much is there is quite extraordinary. I mean, I really find that amazing. We're in this situation where we just don't know how much of the stuff is in the ocean. Completely extraordinary. And furthermore, we have a very poor understanding of what I think is the most likely, most harmful aspects of it, which are the smaller particles, the microplastics and the nanoplastics. So what we need to do is to get a better understanding of both of those aspects of risk, and then to enable society at large to decide whether we should be spending very large amounts of effort, money, manpower, in order to reduce those risks, as opposed to working on hunger, HIV, AIDS, housing, education, all these other pressures on society that we want to increase. So we have to make those harsh, hard decisions. And it seems that at the moment, we're spending a very large amount of effort on talking about solutions before we have really understood the nature of the problem. Now, some of these solutions, so I don't think we should wait till the scientists have got all the answers and then think about solutions. I don't think we've got time to do that. I don't think that's an appropriate way to go on. But I do think that we need to spend a lot of effort on trying to understand what this problem is, as well as finding the easy solutions. Some of the solutions are very easy. They are involved, for instance, in the UK, a very small price on plastic carrier bags caused an 80% decrease in usage. Very simple, and it's changed change in mindset. So those are the easy things to do, in a way. Those are easy. We should be doing those now, and that means changing behavior of individuals, changing behavior of society, changing legislation, and if we need to use money, finances to do it, then that's great. The other sorts of solutions, some of those are extremely difficult, extremely expensive, and may have unintended consequences. So, for instance, to be a little bit trivial, if we don't wrap our cucumbers up in plastic, a third of them go rotten before they get to the shelves. So that's a bit tricky, isn't it? If we put all of our liquids into glass bottles instead of plastic bottles, we use much more carbon dioxide in transporting them around the world, because they're very heavy. And if they're going to be washed, that uses a lot of washing equipment. So these are difficult things to address. So let's not pretend this is easy. These are the hard things to do. So there are the easy things which we should be doing now, and the difficult things. And it strikes me that at the end of this, we may end up with my own particular perspective is that we have the potential for this to be a really serious problem, which is really difficult to resolve. For instance, if the microplastics have very long durability in the oceans, if they last a very long time, and they do a lot of harm. At the moment, we do not know either of those things. We really do not have any idea what the persistence of this material is, and we don't know what harm they do. Certainly, as one of the previous speakers said, we find this material throughout the environment. That doesn't mean that it does a lot of harm. What it means is that it has the potential to do harm. So we need to have some very good science done in order to decide what is the risk from this material. Now, I'm particularly glad to be in this part of the world. As has just been pointed out, this is where a lot of the rivers are supposed to supply a lot of the plastics to the ocean. And it strikes me that the skills that we have and the skills that exist in this part of the world really can be used together to make a very constructive and a very positive partnership And I seriously hope that my visit here to India this time is going to lead to some very positive partnerships, and not just talking about these problems, which I do a lot, but actually trying to resolve them. They need to be resolved, and we need to find solutions, but we also need to understand this very difficult problem.
Thank you very much for sharing your interesting thoughts on, and now I will request Ambassador to share her views on that.
Thank you. I've been wondering, among all of these very, very complex issues, how could we possibly synthesize one important message from, let's say, from the government side of looking at this. We who work with policies and with governance, and not with the experts and the scientists, we have to look at what we can do for our societies to provide proper ways of working and of understanding. And I think maybe the most important message that Norway finds that we can share with countries like India in our partnerships has to do with this balance between use and protection. And obviously, well, first, one thing that we found very fascinating when we looked at the globe, the globus, the Earth, is that Norway and India have almost exactly the same numbers of square meters of ocean space, which might be surprising to you when you look at Norway's size on the map. We are 5 million people, can you imagine? But our coastal area is the same as India's. And one thing that we find very, very interesting to look into together with India is how we should be able to use this ocean space for the purpose of the environment and for the growing population of India in a sustainable manner. And I think we all realize that the Earth is not going to be able to provide what the numerous and growing numbers of people need to eat over the next, well, let's call it 100 years or 500 years. If I remember correctly, I think somebody said that more than 90% of the biomass existing in the oceans is below 100 meters under sea level. So a huge potential for feeding people and animals, I suppose, is not explored, or even yet we haven't even started to exploit it. However, India is a country that fishes quite a bit, but very close to the coast. Norway is a country where we have been used to going far out into the oceans and very deep in order to find our food, because we live in a place where nothing can grow, so we need to get our food out of the ocean. So I think that my comment would be that what we would like to look at, together with, I think, anybody who'd be interested, is to see how integrated management of the ocean space is absolutely essential, meaning food. How do we manage to exploit the sources for nutrition from the oceans? How do we manage to use the same oceans for green transport, which obviously is going to be in increasing demand and in increasing use as well? To increase the transport, but make sure that the transport is green and hopefully sustainable, possibly using renewable fuels on the way. And the energy production of this Earth could possibly also have a lot to take out of the ocean, of all the energy which is there, how to harness this. So our key word, the integrated ocean management model of having sectors looking at this together, seems to be entirely crucial. Not one of them can be developed without seeing the interlinkages to the other sectors. And food, energy, and transport is something that we are all going to rely on, obviously, as nations and as an international community. So the need for this holistic entrance to the complexities here, to avoid the pillars and try to look at the whole spectrum, I think that might be what I'd like to leave for today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting way of looking at this perspective in a different form. Now the challenges what we talk today is, you know, there are multiple stakeholders involved in the ocean sector. In India, more than a dozen sectors are working in the ocean, but nobody owns it. How to handle this, how to address this problem. But if you look at the shipping, fisheries, Coast Guard, Navy, so many people are working in, so many sectors are working in the ocean side. But we need to have a coordinated effort within the country, and within this region we need to have some coordinated effort to address this problem. As it was mentioned earlier, it's a global issue. It's need to be addressed. At the same time, as you mentioned, there are more opportunities, to, like, in terms of food, transport, green transport, energy. There are other areas. Even India is going in a big way to go for a blue economy thing. They are planning to go in a big way because, like you said, we have 1,300 islands. We have not even explored any of those things so far. So there are a lot of opportunities to you make use of this natural resource, but at the same time, it has to be in a sustainable way, because India is also signatory to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So in a balancing way, we have to harness the resources in a sustainable way. So in my view, that we need to take both of them on board and to go about it. So in this, Dr. Ranmurthy, would you share some more things on this?
Unless they have something from their side for that.
Yeah, I believe we can have some questions if you have on that. You can feel free to ask some questions because.
When you were speaking about the problem and how little is known about it, one was reminded of other regimes like the ozone regime before this, and also the big problem of climate change. The concepts of scientific uncertainty, the precautionary approach, the precautionary principle. In the recent years, we've also seen some sort of soft laws and declarations appearing on the issue of plastic pollution in the oceans. So my question is, how amenable do you think this issue is to global negotiations? Do you see a treaty or a convention or some sort of negotiations, especially in the context of the treaty fatigue that we see in the context of climate change? So do you think the world is ready to get into a fresh negotiation to address this problem, given its status now? Thank you.
I think that's a very good question, and I would be cautious about saying that the world is ready for that yet. And as you will have gathered from what I said before, because our uncertainty is so large, I think it would be very, very difficult to persuade to engineer an international binding agreement. I mean, we can't get one on climate change, which is binding. So to be able to get one where the uncertainties are so large in terms of the science, I think it would be premature to dream that we could do that. I mean, if one wants to look back perhaps to the Montreal Protocol for CFCs, that was a very simple issue and a very clear issue, and it went through very quickly as a result of that. But I think in this instance, and because it has such fundamental effect on people's working, their lives, I think the chances of getting that as a binding international agreement, as opposed to just one of a declaration of intent, is rather unlikely in the very near future. So we need to have more science so we can actually make some positive, hard statements that this is the damage it's doing, and then we can move forward on that.
Good evening. I was just thinking in terms of reducing the transport of waste pollution, land-based pollution to oceans. So what could be the ways to do that? And also in ocean, once the pollution goes, it shows that it gets collected because of the motion at certain hot spots. So it may be, how does it affect during the collection? Does it affect the living being during transport from the one place to another, or only when it gets collected? I mean, these are some fundamental issues which I have been thinking about. So maybe you can throw some light.
But I think one thing which you are asking about containing in the land-based pollution. Now I saw in many of these rivers, they have a gratings which was kept just before entering into the sea. The grating is nothing but whatever it comes, that floating debris is collected at that particular place and they are removed in the easiest way. In many of the small creeks it is possible, but of course in the big rivers and all it is quite complex, but it has been done on the routine way. Coming to the...
It was also mentioned by the Honorable Ambassador that use of plastics in place of coal for producing energy. Is it...
I can just see you. No, I think it's very important to point out that this is one of the many attempts that might be made where the reuse of plastic can be a stimulant for the collection of plastic. So this has to do, in the way I see it, as a balance between, well, reducing the use of plastics, but in case plastic is used, it should be seen as a resource for another production cycle or for going into a protected cyclus that doesn't implicate a loss of the materials into nature, whether it is land or sea. And I think it sounds like a very, very simple and easy way of looking at it. But in our experience, there is a huge business potential in finding out how we can use plastic in a smart way. And we have experience showing that the private sector sometimes can be very productive and innovative if there is a profit to be made. And in our case, in places in Europe, we know that there is plastic collected and plastic recycled, and it comes out in forms and shapes and products that again are creating jobs and money and taxes. So, but when it comes to how to use plastic instead of coal, this is a very, very interesting and completely non-proven use of the plastic. But a small part of our collaboration with India implies also a project where we would try to pilot this.
Please.
So my request is for Richard, sir, that you were talking about the solutions. So I would very much like to know that what solutions are on the table as of now, because all of us always talk about the problem, and as you were saying, we cannot wait when we get all the data and then we start our action. So maybe the solutions that are possible in this context in India, which are already in place in some other part of the world, maybe in your country.
Right. So certainly the most obvious, as Gears just said, is considering this material to have value, and if one can give it value, then of course this generates a solution. The sort of solution that I am more thinking about are the solutions from having very good science in understanding the nature of the problem, particularly the microplastics, then to encourage the industry to produce plastics which, if they have to be put into the waste category, that they are easy to recycle. So that would be the sort of, and initially also to use plastics which do less harm. Now what I imagine is going to be the case is that we're going to find that certain types of plastics don't have much lower persistence than others. They are lost from the system very quickly, go into the geological sediment, for instance. Other sorts last a lot longer. We're going to find that certain types cause much more harm. Now, when we can identify which are the ones which have high persistence, which are the ones which cause more harm, then we can immediately go to industry and say, look, this is really your top priority, is to stop using this sort of material. So those are the sorts of solutions which I would tend to move towards. The sorts of changing behavior are things that we've all got to do, as I said before. These are the relatively easy things to do. When we're talking about changing the construction of car tires, for instance, a very complicated structure, changing what we use in paints, what we use, a whole variety of very complicated issues to address. Those are hard. They're not going to be done overnight. Some 14,000 different types of plastic are used in our everyday lives. It's not easy just to say we're going to ban them all, and it's not the right way forward either. But we can identify the ones we need to hit hard if we get some good data.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the speakers for their interesting views. We need to close this session. We'll have to move on to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Somasundar, for chairing the session. And I thank all the speakers, Dr. Murthy, Dr. Pandey, Dr. Lampett, and Ms. Bilton for giving a better insight of the current problem on marine pollution, its status, and key issues. We will now move towards the second panel discussion. Thank you. I request the speakers on this dais to join us in the dialogue. Okay, we now move on to panel discussion 2, titled Way Forward, Moving Towards Clean Oceans. I request Dr. K. Somasundar again to chair this session, and I request the following speakers to join us on the dais. Shri Arvind Nautiyal, please. He is the Joint Secretary for Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. And Dr. Vijay Habu, he is the Senior Vice President for Reliance Industries. And Dr. Ashish Chaturvedi, Director for Climate Change at GIZ.
Welcome back to the second session, Way Forward, Moving Towards the Clean Ocean. We have 3 distinguished speakers. Dr. Arvind Nautiyal from Ministry of Environment Forest, Dr. Vijay Habu, and Ashish. We have about 20 minutes of time for us. We have 3 questions posed here to be discussed in this session. What are the potential local, regional, and national, international policy recommendations and technological interventions required to address this problem, and particularly to improve the existing state of marine litter? And what are the views and effectiveness of these opinions? The next is what role the extended producer's responsibility play in reducing the marine litter. That's the second question we need to ask. And also the market-based instruments to encourage formal and informal private sectors to invest, thereby addressing the challenges related to collection, setting up of material recovery facilities and plastic banks. And lastly, would voluntary declarations by large users of a single-use packaging to be shifted to an alternate by 2022, whether we can realize this challenge. So before I will request now Dr. Nautiyal to give his views from this point of view.
Thank you, Chair. A very good afternoon to all the distinguished dignitaries on the dais, and ladies and gentlemen. On this very sensitive topic and very important topic of marine litter, cleanup of oceans, plastics, all-encompassing subjects. So I stand here from the perspective of policy legislations, because Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is mainly the regulatory body which deals and frames regulations, also responsible for monitoring them through the respective agencies of the state central government as also the state government. And so there comes in the role of a legislator and a monitor. Further to that, I mean, it's not only about legislations, it's also about the ministry's intervention and supporting the various endeavors of various sectors, NGOs, state government bodies, central government bodies, towards mitigative measures, preventive measures. So broadly talking about each of them a little bit, I'll just let this house know about the various regulations and the legislations that we are presently having and what we foresee in future. So the most important is the coastal regulation zone. Considering the enormity of the subject, considering the importance that we need to give to the pristine coastal environment and the marine environment. So a special coastal regulation zone notification has been issued by the ministry. So it has been there in since about 1991, periodically reviewed, exercised some revisions, going ahead with the need of the times, balancing the imperatives of the development and managing of the coastal resources and environment. So depending on the needs plus the enormity of the various issues that we face, so this notification has been revised. And a comprehensive notification has recently been issued. I'm sure you might all be aware of it, but it's quite a comprehensive one from the perspective of environment management, particularly in the sensitive areas. So the most critical areas are the CRZ1. We call it as the coastal regulation zone. So the CRZ1 areas are the areas closest to the shore. They are the intertidal zones and other ecologically sensitive areas. So there are we have listed about 12 categories of ecologically sensitive areas, and there are very strict regulations in terms of any activity to be conducted there. So, I mean, those are the areas which we need to tackle the most. And of course, because of all land-based activities, because of our industrial actions and other activities which lead to a lot of debris. So that is where we can hit it hard. So CRZ 1A and 1B, these are the areas which are very close to the shore. Likewise, we have the CRZ 4 extending up to 12 nautical miles into the marine waters. And not only the sea part of it, we also have regulations on the creeks, estuaries and the rivers which have a tidal influence. Because as we have been hearing all along, whatever happens on land-based activities through the nalas, through the rivulets, ultimately finds its way into the ocean. So we need to also control the entry points. So that is where also we have regulations. I'll not go into the details of what the regulations are, but it's primarily aimed at controlling the menace of marine pollution. Primarily about that, there are about other regulations as well. Then parallelly, the ministry has also gone in for considering the menace, if I may say so. I mean, while Dr. Lampett has just elaborated about, why plastics is parallelly important to us, no doubt on that. Nevertheless, in the Indian scenario particularly, plastic has been seen to be a big menace. And so for plastic regulations particularly the polythene bags that we've been using for commercial use in the markets and all, so we have come up with a regulation of a detailed specification and a regulation for less than 50 micron thickness. Now, the issue about enforcement and monitoring is something we need to work upon. But still, I mean, as far as that regulation is concerned, that is in place. Now, coming a bit about the mitigation and the preventive actions that the ministry or the small little initiatives the ministry has been taking. There is an integrated coastal zone management project. It's a World Bank aided project. It's a big enough project. To start with, we had just pilots in about 3 states. And we had those states are Gujarat, Odisha and West Bengal. And besides that, there was a national component which dealt with broadly, primarily mapping the entire coastline. So as to, till such time we didn't have any data on hazard lines, we didn't have any sacrosanct data on what are the high tide lines are, how far are the intertidal areas, where are the ecologically sensitive areas located, so and so forth. So all that massive mapping exercise has been done in association with the Survey of India, and now we have all complete data for the entire 7,500 plus coastline, including the islands 1,382 to be precise. So data for entire coastline of the country is digitally available, mapped, to be used for further referencing purposes and for further studies. So that is one derivative of that particular project. Besides that, it also looks into the sustainable development and alternate livelihoods on the for the coastal communities. Ultimately, it is as a humanity, as the ministry, as the central government, it's a body, it's a prime importance to look into the sustainable development and the needs of the people who are living on the coasts. So while we might talk about other mitigation measures, this is one aspect. So this project also delves heavily on the livelihood options, various livelihood options, fishing definitely being predominant one. So what could be the efficient means of fishing? There have been notifications, there have been guidelines, there have been projects to various state units. Besides that, other than fishing, there are some alternate livelihoods which have not been tapped to the extent that the potential exists. So there's a focus and there's an effort in that direction. For instance, low elevation coastal zone, allophytic cultures, seagrass cultivations. So these are some areas where there could be a shift so as to balance the environmental imperatives, also maintaining the livelihoods for the people there. Then on the lines of ICZMP2, under the National Action Plan for Climate Change, there's something called National Coastal Mission. So this particular mission is likely to be, we have come to a stage of formulating the document for it. It will be just presented to the council, and if it comes through, which is quite likely, so it's going to be a massive project extending over 15 years, and that's going to address all gamut of issues, including pollution abatements, including your sustainability, including your blue economy, and all those things. So anything related to marine environment, particularly addressing the pollution abatement part of it. So that will come under National Coastal Mission. And under the ongoing ICZM project, we have made a small initiative. It might look small, but as it said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. So what we have done is, we have piloted and identified one pilot beach in each of the coastal states. So it's effectively 13. So we have taken it under a program called BEAMS, acronymed Beach Environment and Aesthetic Management Systems. So that's a comprehensive enviro tourism project, wherein all sensitivities of environment, education, outreach, as well as a sustainable tourism model has been formulated, and these, the programs are already on, and I'm happy to inform that the infrastructure and other activities are just building on in about 4 or 5 beaches, and we hope that once these are completed, then we'll be taking this application to the FEE, which is the agency for certifying the beaches as blue flag, which is the most important and most prestigious international standard for accreditation of beaches. So there's an endeavor to apply these beaches for blue flag certification. There they have taken up massive cleanup works, environment education, outreach. So considering that MOES is doing the majority of work on the water side of it, MOEF's endeavors have been more on the coastal areas and the beach stretches and things like that. So just to share with you the experiences of this BEAMS program, on an average, on a month, we are just, presently, it's a humble beginning, we have just identified about a stretch of about 1 or 2 kilometers in each beach area, and massive cleaning exercise, including mechanized equipments, has been taken up. There we are on an average getting 590 kgs of plastic alone, besides all other this thing. 590 kgs average monthly plastic, which is either there because of the land-based activities of the tourists, or what is ingested by the ocean during the tidal effects. So those, and we have what under this project also we have developed a model for sustainability and complete environment management, in the sense that there will be complete water recycling, there will be solar power plants for powering the activities there. There is going to be a grey water treatment plant. There are going to be drinking facilities. There are going to be bit of recreational activities. There are going to be shower rooms, change rooms, and things like that. So we have a comprehensive environment around the beaches. So this is, I just wanted to tell the House about this particular initiative of the ministry. And so I think with these, there will be some pilots, some scalable and replicable models coming out of all these studies to be taken up in a bigger manner. And we also were looking forward to work in association with national, international partners towards mitigating this particular issue that faces us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nautiyal, for sharing your views on policy aspects, and particularly the implementation of CRZ and time to time its amendments towards prevention and mitigation of the coastal issues and also the beams. Now may I request J. Babu to share your views on that.
Thank you very much. I think very impressive overview by Dr. Nautiyal. Some of these things were, I heard it for the first time, and I've been in industry for long, to say that, you know, I just wish if these things, some of the things that he mentioned are made known more to industry, you would find ready partners in, you know, cleaning up a lot of these things. But that said, I'm going to give a perspective on industry, on some of the things that the session chairman asked, you know, as talking points. One is the policy recommendations. Many times I feel that a lot of these situations emerge from the outlook that we carry. Dr. Nautiyal, much as he said a lot, somehow the outlook on the littering sneaks into the material rather than the behavior. That is, plastics are the menace, not the littering behavior. And somehow this thought just creeps in, and I feel that that is where a lot of times we miss the remedies. So one is the outlook of the policy makers, that we need to have crystal clarity whether the material is problem or the behavior is the problem. We need to kind of take a look at the Indian reality, social reality. You take a watchman outside a housing society. We pay him some 5,500 rupees or something thereabouts as a salary, a pittance. He has a 12-hour duty. Where does he get his sambar or tea from? You know, those are the kind of flimsy plastic materials. On the one hand, we talk about inclusive growth. Which is the biggest carrier for this inclusive growth? He doesn't have a cutlery, you know, to have his, you know, cup of tea or whatever it is. So plastics, flimsy, and even those ones are an integral part of his life. He doesn't have a tiffin box where he can carry. He just lives his, you know, he feeds himself on a day-to-day basis. So an outlook on the material versus behavior. An outlook on the industry. Many times in all these seminars I find, there is never, I heard a very nice phrase, integrated ocean management. There also needs to be an integrated approach to remedial measures. Most of the times the focus comes on industry, what is industry doing, and eventually it happens, the whole thing navigates towards punitive measures, either restrictions of this kind or that kind. And the Maharashtra government case is a case in point. It just came on 23rd March, about a year ago, and states are merrily copying, you know, just copy-pasting it template to template. The outlook of plastic waste management cannot be left to the idiosyncrasies of individual states. 29 states, 7 union territories, if they start formulating their things. Industry that cuts across different states finds it very hard to, you know, kind of come out with solutions and remedies. So the outlook of states also needs to be, you know, kind of uniform. More importantly, it's as if the industry is the creator of the demon. Industry, the food industry and industry that uses plastics, primarily let's talk about packaging plastics. That packaging is done of constituents that are essential to mankind, to citizens. Cadbury, I'm just taking a name, please don't, any chocolate manufacturer doesn't start his enterprise to create litter. It creates an enterprise to provide a chocolate, a good beverage. That is the essential, and that these are things needed by a pharmaceutical company. Doesn't use plastic packaging. Its primary purpose is not to create or throw or be a source of litter. It's a vehicle to provide things that are essential for mankind. Suddenly now you turn around and say that, you need to also go and look after, the litter management. It's a big thing for them. They are not used to that kind of thing. So the outlook has to have, that is not to say that you let them off the hook. And I'll explain to you what can be done by these companies. But an integrated approach has to involve as much or rather more on union urban local bodies. We never find such seminars wherein urban local body executives or chiefs are brought together and ask questions. You collect 2% waste clearance cess every month from us, from establishments. What do you do with it? Suddenly you cannot have the industry, which is a supplier of constituents, to be an outsourced agency for clearing litter. So there seems to be a mismatch, and suddenly then what happens is, and the third outlook is knowing what are plastics. A lot of time you go to even this association, you'll find people talking about plastics without knowing the basics of plastics, that there are different kinds of plastics, that each of them has a different chemistry, that each of them has a different property, therefore different applications. So one is the chemistry-wise classification. The other is people are not even, it's not common knowledge that plastics can be viewed as two different packaging. Plastics can be viewed functionally as well. There is something called rigid plastics, something called flexible plastics. Both have a different propensity to leak out. You cannot have a policy that, to use a Hindi phrase, sab ghode 12 takke. You will have to have policies that are, horses for courses. There is a third classification about plastics, at the very least needs to be known. That is something called single polymer plastics, such as the PET bottles, the water bottles. The other are multi-polymer plastics, such as the toothpaste tubes. And the third are multi-component packaging, such as what are called brick cartons, that are the ones that you use for packaging maza or fruit juices and kind of thing, which has paper plus metal plus plastics, 3 different components. A single polymer plastic obviously will be much easier to recycle versus multi-polymer plastic, and multi-component plastics or packaging would be that much most difficult. But why did these packages come about? They did not come about because of some fancy purposes. There are functional reasons why these things came about. Vegetable oil packed in a pouch is a liquid, and so is milk. But the plastic that goes into the packing of milk, and these are, Professor Limpert, is some of the things prevalent in India, may not be in the UK, but we get milk here in pouches. Milk pouch is made of a polymer or plastic which is numbered 4, LDPE. And the pouch used for packing vegetable oils is number 7. It has multi-layered polymers. Both are liquids, yet they are different plastics. Why? So there is a purpose, there is a packaging science involved in that thing. In none of these discourses I ever find packaging experts invited. You have environmentalists talking about it, governmental people and industry people, but never, and we have Indian Institute of Packaging. We have packaging institutes by the government of India. They have never been formally brought on the table. And the reason it is important is many times the solutions could be simple, like Professor Limpert said. Many times, one of the things that industry could be asked to do is, do we really need the kind of packaging of the complexity that it is presently there? A lot of times, simple solutions, targets could be given rather than forcing industry to get into EPR of this kind, how much you collect, X%, 30% this year, 50% year 2, X% in year 3. Rather than putting the onus on collection, the force, in my opinion, and I belong to polymer industry, not many would like from the statement coming from me, but this is as candid as I can get. Industry should be forced to move away from multi-component to multi-polymers, from multi-polymers to single polymers. That would make collections, recycling so very easy. Not that it is easily possible, but these are the kind of pressures that the government should put on industry. Not on collect this much. Collection is not the forte of industry. You will only end up, giving signals that we are so tough, we did this to the industry, we did that to the industry, and you will cause kind of a disarray in the society. You are flogging a player, a stakeholder who is not just geared up to doing that kind of thing. And therefore, what industry will eventually do up is kind of give big statements such as by 2022 we use 25% of recycled plastic, and they will make global commitments. Usage of recycled plastic, is it going to cause any mitigation in the litter? The focus should be on litter management, not on how much recycled material that you use. Recycled material eventually gone in the packaging is going to be a packaging. It is going to be littering. It is going to be littered. A person who has the habit of littering is not going to litter less because he reads, oh, okay, it contains 25% recycled material. The habits have to be hammered. So if the industry needs a packaging material based on plastics, a better way to force the industry is on its strong points. Namely, you guys are familiar with the food packaging interactions. Therefore, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, you convert your X percentage of packaging from multi-component to single packaging. That would be in the right step, rather than forcing companies on collection part of it. Collection is, in my opinion, squarely ULB responsibility. And people are paying taxes for that thing. So rather than absolve the ULBs from that thing and force industry, because it's a soft target, it's a focused target, and then it gets a kind of talking points that this state did ban 14 items, that state banned 50 items, and you kind of create PowerPoints of these things to no effect. The littering continues. So if our focus is on littering, we better address, on the right channels. A lot is talked about, technological interventions. I don't see why industry's help is not taken by the ULBs. For example, we have drones. Why isn't drone technology used? Big companies asked in local zones, particularly in coastal zones, to use their technology and resources to help government map that thing. Large companies will be more than willing to do that. Be a helping partner to the ULBs and the government authorities, rather than force industry to collect waste. Collection of waste is not the forte of industry. Let's not hammer the industry on the points which they are not equipped to do that. So drone technology and industry would have a lot of intelligence within their engineering disciplines to help out with drone technology to map coastal regions or any other region alongside the banks of water bodies. Industry can be asked to develop scanners for identifying different plastics of different waste. Industry can be asked to support barriers at points where the water bodies from land enters the ocean. Simple things such as barriers in Mithi Nadi in Mumbai. It's a puzzle that a common Mumbaikar is befuddled. Why aren't there just barriers that stop that can be put, and it would be at manageable costs. So these are simple solutions that you would find industry more than willing partner, rather than force it into collection of this and that. And I would like to raise a point here why it is difficult. When you talk about industry, it is not as if it's a monolithic entity. What is industry? On the one hand, you have huge companies which are multinational. The Levers, the Coca-Colas, the Pepsis. There are big companies, but they are not multinationals. They are localized, like the Bisleris. They are not multinationals, but they are big companies. Then there are small companies, local bottlers or local packers, and they are organized. And there are a lot of, 60% is my estimate, empirical, I have no data to prove that, but 60% of the industry is in the unorganized sector, which goes below the radar. There are these small toffee makers. You go alongside the, from Delhi to Agra route, and you'll have got toffee sellers selling toffees or local produce, and they pack it in these things. They will never come on the radar. they are also not, in the formal economy. So therefore, as a policy, every food supplier or everything should be brought into the formal economy. And to that effect, I think this government, which has done through GST and everything, is a very welcome step, because it's going to force all people who are in the commercial entities to come into the formal economy. Once they are in the formal economy, anything you could debate, it cannot be solved in this 20 minutes, but which is the right approach. But once they are in the formal economy, you can track them, and can ask them to do this or that. Just one simple thing is that I would suggest is, India has a unique, had a requirement of small packages. Those are not very prevalent in Europeans, so Europeans probably would not have paid attention to it. So therefore, we needn't look for these remedies to these problems to the West. Sachets of shampoos, hair oil, ketchups, these came as unique Indian requirements as, for ensuring inclusive growth. But these are the tiny ones. On the one hand, while they are, ensuring inclusive growth and affordability, they are the ones that are most evasive. They just can't be caught. Collection is the biggest problem. What you do with the collected material, in my opinion, is a lesser of a challenge. Give it in the hands of our chemical engineers and we'll solve the problem. Whether it's into road making, kiln, that is lesser of a problem. The problem is in collection. Can we therefore, as a policy, not impose a minimum weight to any of these things? Today, the pouches are less than a gram or 2 grams. Can we have a prescribed minimum weight of 10 grams? I'm just saying a number. I'm not prescribing this number, a 10 gram. So that then becomes a good reason for the rack pickers to pick it up, because then he gets value out of it, and he has an incentive to pick it up without losing the functionality. So these are small steps which actually government can do, put on the industry rather than collection. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for interesting views from the industry point of view, and talking about the classification of various plastics and its uses. Now I request Ashok Chaturvedi to say a few.
Yeah, I'll try and say a few words. We're almost at 6 p.m. and I think people have been patiently waiting for this session to end almost. It's fascinating to actually have a government representative and an industry person speak before me. I'm not really an environmentalist, but I work for the environment sector for the last 12 years, working for the German government, but supporting bilateral cooperation. I had a couple of slides, but I think I'll skip those. I want to talk about specific issues which have actually just been raised, and some of the issues that have been raised earlier in the panel discussion as well. So, of course, in addressing the questions that Kaushik had left on his last slide, I think let's start talking about policy. Mr. Nautiyal talked about the CRZ regulation. His ministry's come out with 6 regulations on the different kinds of waste streams, including a very path-breaking plastic waste management rules. The industry is suffering from it. But I think there are significant improvements we've made since the last over the last decade, since we've started working, since the government has been working. We were just talking about it yesterday within the Indo-German working group, where Mr. Nautiyal was also present, that just imagine 10 years ago how much, what was the discussion on waste management in this country. And I think it's incredible how far we've come. The kind of centrality waste management has taken in the discussions in the urban agenda as well as the environmental agenda. Now let's start talking about what kind of instruments are missing as far as the policy regime is concerned. Now, when you start looking at the gaps, right? So you actually have a plastic waste management rule, you have a solid waste rules, and then you actually have something on wastewater. How are these things tied up with each other as far as management is concerned? Who are the stakeholders responsible for managing the waste, plastic waste? Who are the stakeholders which are responsible for managing the wastewater? And who are the stakeholders which are actually responsible for the overall municipal solid waste? And you will see that there are many gaps, and that's precisely why the leakages happen from the city solid waste into the wastewater, from the wastewater into the sea, and all kinds of other flows. So how are we actually regulating those kinds of flows? Have we actually looked at the the gaps in these rules which allow us to actually set up some kind of a integrated authority Do we actually need a central waste management authority or wastewater authority which looks at these different waste rules in an integrated manner? Why do we actually need somebody responsible for the waste management rules, somebody responsible for the sort of plastic waste rules, and then of course somebody else responsible for electronic waste rules and blah, 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 and construction and demolition? All of these have plastics. All of these different streams of waste have plastics, different kinds of plastics, which Mr. Habbu was talking about. The second piece is about extended producer responsibility. I think there have been significant sort of movements towards sort of making producers responsible, and I think that is the right direction for policy to take. It's very important to realize that sort of urban local bodies are really hamstrung as far as their financial capabilities are concerned, as far as their personnel capabilities are concerned. How much investments can municipalities make? How much, do you even trust, how many of you would even say that I actually trust my municipality to take care of my waste? I actually would be delighted if my municipality could actually start managing the entire waste. And of course, what is the skill of the private sector which can be utilized in extended producer responsibility? Now, one thing is whether you want to call it extended producer responsibility or shared responsibility between the producers as well as the urban local bodies. We've actually talked about shared responsibility models, where some of the things that Mr. Habbu was talking about, okay, how much weight should packaging contain? What should be the material composition? This is a very old discussion in this country. Like, why not actually reduce the complexity of the packaging materials themselves? Now, can the municipalities do it themselves? Is that not part of producer responsibility? Whether we call it extended producer responsibility or whether we call it shared producer responsibility, I think these are names. For instance, in Germany, as well as in several other sort of European countries, the communes or the municipalities actually work very closely with the public sector, with the private sector. The space is provided by the municipality. The contracts are actually shared between the municipalities as well as the private sector. So these are not models that are alien to us. We can actually just look around, and we've, even within this country, the Ahmedabad municipality 10 years ago launched a tender to actually set up collection infrastructure for all kinds of different ways, where they wanted the private sector to participate, and that did not function, that did not work out for some reason. So I think we really need to confront this sort of concept of extended producer responsibility and Indianize it. I think the challenge right now is that we're actually struggling with a concept which wasn't developed in this country, has been sort of adopted, and of course people like me have been involved in its adoption in this country through the electronic waste rules and other rules. But I think we really need to Indianize it. We really need to make sure what kind of Indian elements, what is the role of informal sector in producer responsibility. Now, everybody talks about mainstreaming informality. We still do not know what a kabadiwala can actually do to support Reliance or XYZ to actually fulfill their producer responsibility. And we're actually currently doing a project with two large majors, I don't want to name them, who are precisely interested in sort of getting their PET bottles recycled and their multi-layered packaging recycled by involving the informal sector. And we're doing it quite successfully in the city of Gurgaon, working with almost 45,000 households. So it's possible to look at these concepts, talk about what lesson do we get out of Indianizing them, and then get a dialogue with policymakers on how to incorporate them in policy. A sort of a vague sort of intervention where we say, okay, EPR should be a cornerstone of all waste legislation, and therefore it should be blanket. It's not easy. It's e-waste, it's much easier as compared to plastics. But do we actually throw the baby out of the water as well? I think EPR can be Indianized across these different waste streams, and we really need to struggle. And we've actually had several discussions within the MOEFCC, with the MOEFCC, about how to make it much more operational, how to make it work much better as far as plastic waste is concerned. Now, in terms of tax rebates and market-based instruments, I would agree with sort of Mr. Lampet as well as sort of Mr. Habbu. Why not put a simple price tag on every packaging that we have? We don't have a price tag on our packaging. Just imagine when we were sort of, I remember when I was growing up in Delhi, we always got cold drinks and water on these glass bottles, and everybody used to bring the bottles back to the sort of the shop. Why the hell did we do it? Because we always got 5 rupees off or 2 rupees off or 3 rupees off. In Germany this is happening, in the UK it happens. Every bottle, every PET bottle has a price tag on it, and it's substantive. In Germany, it was 25 euro cents when I was living there. In the UK, when I was living there, it was almost 20 cents as well, or 20 pence. 20p, as they call it. So I think we need to really start thinking about very simple solutions like these as well when we start talking about tax rebates and thinking about accelerated depreciation for infrastructure and all has been tried, can be done further. Finally, as far as I am concerned, I think marine litter, I have this really nice slide, which actually, and I'll leave it with the sort of organizers. Basically, if you start thinking about marine litter as a plastic waste management problem, sorry, you're not going to solve the marine litter problem. And I think this is precisely where I find it fascinating that this marine litter discussions happening. Of course, we have some oceanographers, we have some waste management people working together. We actually did a 6-month-long campaign along the East Coast. And we worked with more than 150 village communities, raising awareness about how marine litter is going to challenge them, what kind of livelihood sort of challenges they will face in the future. But we also need to work with city governments together. So what the pilots that we need are not isolated pilots about collecting data in one place, then doing a waste management project in Kochi, and then trying to do something in the coastal area. We really need to demonstrate in 5 or 7 hotspots where we look at one water body, one municipality, one entry into the ocean, and then looking at the data flows from there on, and say there we have some confidence of managing marine litter in this country. Otherwise, these conversations will go on. We'll keep talking about the fact that, okay, MOES is collecting data, MOEF is regulating, MOHUA is implementing the plastic waste management rules, and we are all trying to solve this problem together. I think that's not going to happen. So this is something that we've just discussed with the MOEF. We are going to launch a project, hopefully towards the end of this year, with the support of the German government, where we'll be working in 4 or 5 hotspots in the coastal areas, precisely taking this approach of working with all of you together, including the industry, to say, here are 3 or 4 or 5 examples which we have created of trying to first attempt at managing marine litter in this country. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashish, for sharing various interesting views about the solid waste management, and particularly the shared responsibility and extended responsibility models, and the close coordination between private sector and public sectors and to address this problem. I couple of minutes to have any questions, any comments.
Ashish pointed out certain questions, only Mr. Arvind could sort of respond to those, especially about policy lack in
See, unfortunately, this is such a vast subject that it spans across ministries and spans across various departments. But as a main regulatory body, I mean, as far as these waste rules and these policies are concerned, these are already coordinated by one particular division of the ministry, and in fact, which works very closely with the Central Pollution Control Board. Now, as regards the effective implementation of these, since these are concurrent subjects, not totally owned or attributed to the central government, they are to be implemented and monitored by the state government bodies and the ULBs in particular. So there I do agree that that's a weak point, and we need to work strongly on that. So, but as far as the dissemination part is concerned, as he rightly pointed out, I mean, till about few years back, there was hardly any policy regulation anywhere, or even if it existed, it was just in isolation. Nobody knew about it. Now, thanks to the integration of knowledge and communication between various bodies, at least these regulations are very clearly known. The industry has taken these policies and in the right stride. They have been partnering with us. In fact, some of the suggestions in drawing up the regulations do come up from the industry side themselves. There are some practical aspects which Mr. Vijay Abu has just pointed out. They are worth taking a look at. We'll definitely have a look at it. And as we say, everything comes out of experiencing and implementing. So let's hope that some demonstrable projects and interventions as initiated by GIZ would throw out some more light as to what is the actual way we need to look forward to tackle this issue. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all the speakers for their presentations. Now we are almost at the end of this session. You have any announcements to make? Okay.
Dear all, thank you for joining us today for this session. Thank you, thank you. Thank you.